LibriVox.org. An Inland Voyage by Robert Louis Stevenson. Noyon Cathedral. Noyon stands about a mile from the river, in a little plain surrounded by wooded hills, and entirely covers an eminence with its tile roofs, surmounted by a long, straight-backed cathedral with two stiff towers. As we got into the town, the tile roofs seemed to tumble uphill one upon another, in the oddest disorder. But for all their scrambling, they did not attain above the knees of the cathedral, which stood, upright and solemn, over all. As the streets drew near to this presiding genius, through the market-place, under the Hôtel de Ville, they grew emptier and more composed. Blank walls and shuttered windows were turned to the great edifice, and grass grew on the white causeway. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. The Hôtel du Nord, nevertheless, lights its secular tapers within a stone cast of the church, and we had the superb East End before our eyes all morning from the window of our bedroom. I have seldom looked on the East End of a church with more complete sympathy. As it flanges out in three wide terraces, and settles down broadly on the earth, it looks like the poop of some great old battleship. Hollow-backed buttresses carry vases, which figure for the stern lanterns. There is a roll in the ground, and the towers just appear above the pitch of the roof, as though the good ship were bowing lazily over an Atlantic swell. At any moment it might be 100 feet away from you, climbing the next billow. At any moment a window might open, and some old admiral thrust forth a cocked hat, and proceed to take an observation. The old admirals sail the sea no longer. The old ships of battle are all broken up, and live only in pictures. But this, that was a church before ever they were thought upon, is still a church, and makes as brave an appearance by the Oise. The cathedral and the river are probably the two oldest things for miles around, and certainly they have both a grand old age. The sacristan took us to the top of one of the towers, and showed us the 5 bells hanging in their loft. From above, the town was a tessellated pavement of roofs and gardens. The old line of rampart was plainly traceable, and the sacristan pointed out to us, far across the plain, in a bit of gleaming sky between two clouds, the towers of Chateau Coucy. I find I never weary of great churches. It is my favorite kind of mountain scenery. Mankind was never so happily inspired as when it made a cathedral, a thing as single and specious as a statue to the first glance, and yet, on examination, as lively and interesting as a forest in detail. The height of spires cannot be taken by trigonometry. They measure absurdly short, but how tall they are to the admiring eye! And where we have so many elegant proportions growing one out of the other, and all together into one, it seems as if proportion transcended itself, and became something different and more imposing. I could never fathom how a man dares to lift up his voice to preach in a cathedral. What is he to say that will not be an anticlimax? For though I have heard a considerable variety of sermons, I never yet heard one that was so expressive as a cathedral. 'Tis the best preacher itself, and preaches day and night, not only telling you of man's art and aspirations in the past, but convicting your own soul of ardent sympathies, or rather, like all good preachers, It sets you preaching to yourself, and every man is his own doctor of divinity in the last resort. As I sat outside of the hotel in the course of the afternoon, the sweet groaning thunder of the organ floated out of the church like a summons. I was not averse, liking the theatre so well, to sit out an act or two of the play, but I could never rightly make out the nature of the service I beheld. 4 or 5 priests and as many choristers were singing Miserere before the high altar when I went in. There was no congregation, but a few old women on chairs, and old men kneeling on the pavement. After a while a long train of young girls, walking 2 and 2, each with a lighted taper in her hand, and all dressed in black with a white veil, came from behind the altar, and began to descend upon the nave, the 4 first carrying a Virgin and Child upon a table. The priests and choristers arose from their knees and followed after, singing Ave Mary as they went. In this order they made the circuit of the cathedral, passing twice before me, where I leaned against a pillar. The priest who seemed of most consequence was a strange, down-looking old man. He kept mumbling prayers with his lips, but as he looked upon me darkling, it did not seem as if prayer were uppermost in his heart. 2 others who bore the burthen of the chaunt were stout, brutal, military-looking men of 40, with bold, over-fed eyes. They sang with some lustiness, and trolled forth Ave Mary like a garrison catch. The little girls were timid and grave. As they footed slowly up the aisle, each one took a moment's glance at the Englishman, and the big nun who played marshal fairly stared him out of countenance. As for the choristers, from first to last they misbehaved as only boys can misbehave, and cruelly marred the performance with their antics. I understood a great deal of the spirit of what went on. Indeed, it would be difficult not to understand the Miserere, which I take to be the composition of an atheist. If it ever be a good thing to take such despondency to heart, the Miserere is the right music, and a cathedral a fit scene. So far I am at one with the Catholics. An odd name for them after all. But why in God's name these holiday choristers? Why these priests who steal wandering looks about the congregation while they feign to be at prayer? Why this fat nun who rudely arranges her procession and shakes delinquent virgins by the elbow? Why this spitting and snuffing and forgetting of keys, and 1,001 little misadventures that disturb a frame of mind laboriously edified with chants and organings? In any playhouse reverend fathers may see what can be done with a little art, and how to move high sentiments. It is necessary to drill the supernumeraries, and have every stool in its proper place. One other circumstance distressed me. I could bear a Miserere myself, having had a good deal of open-air exercise of late, but I wished the old people somewhere else. It was neither the right sort of music, nor the right sort of divinity for men and women who have come through most accidents by this time, and probably have an opinion of their own upon the tragic element in life. A person up in years can generally do his own Miserere for himself, although I notice that such a one often prefers Jubilate Deo for his ordinary singing. On the whole, the most religious exercise for the aged is probably to recall their own experience. So many friends dead, so many hopes disappointed, so many slips and stumbles, and withal so many bright days and smiling providences. There is surely the matter of a very eloquent sermon in all this. On the whole, I was greatly solemnized. In the little pictorial map of our whole inland voyage, which my fancy still preserves and sometimes unrolls for the amusement of odd moments, Noyon Cathedral figures on a most preposterous scale, and must be nearly as large as a department. I can still see the faces of the priests, as if they were at my elbow, and hear Ave Maria, ora pro nobis, sounding through the church. All Noyon is blotted out for me by these superior memories, and I do not care to say more about the place. It was but a stack of brown roofs at the best, where I believe people live very reputably in a quiet way. But the shadow of the church falls upon it when the sun is low, and the 5 bells are heard in all quarters, telling that the organ has begun. If ever I join the Church of Rome, I shall stipulate to be Bishop of Noyon on the Oise. Section 17.